Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum, Data-Driven Leadership. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Also, be sure to subscribe to Argyle on YouTube for exclusive access to all our past events. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ricky J. Koenig, CIO, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. We're super excited to have Ricky with us for a keynote presentation titled The CIO's Playbook for Risk, Resilience, and Business Growth. Welcome, Ricky. Over to you.
Thank you. So CIOs today aren't just running IT. They're really calling the plays that can mean business wins or loses. I've been a CIO and a global IT leader in exponentially growing two established organizations, public sector and private sector, and across all industries like oil and gas, big pharma, natural resources, gaming and software development, and more. So I know for thoughtful planning, coordination, and the balance between IT resiliency and growing the business is key to success. So today, I'd like to walk through how we can achieve that balance through integrating risk management into strategy, stabilizing digital operations, and preparing for impact in uncertain times, aligning IT budgets with risk-based decision making and not just short-term cost savings, and hearing about your own experiences and methods that you've used. So today, let's talk about the playing field, the fundamentals, look at some real-world case studies, and build our playbook. We'll have time at the end for discussion, but again, feel free to leave comments in the chat as we go. The CIO role has evolved a bit from its early 1980s intention, which was based largely on delivering reliable data and operations. So that part hasn't changed. But now, successful CIOs are expected to navigate through broader front lines of finances, risks, market trends, and priorities, and at a far quicker pace. CIOs are still leading IT strategy, but they're now highly embedded in the business strategy. They're not just concentrating on operative delivery. They're finding both strategic and tactical talents and capabilities together in one makes a great CIO. And those capabilities in one person is really hard to find. Successful CIOs are now directly creating value for the organization. It's no longer just the job of the CEO or the COO or the CFO. Successful CIOs are positioning themselves to enable the business through cybersecurity even, and we'll talk more on that soon. They're developing smooth, proactive, long-term transformation roadmaps. And they're not just relying on on-the-fly reactions to ad hoc requests, trends, and problems. And they have made their organizations more resilient to surprise external regulatory and geopolitical changes. So, because of today's expectations of the new CIO role, foundational priorities are key. CIOs need a playbook to incorporate risk management and resiliency throughout their strategy for the sustainability of the whole corporation. So I ask you, if CIOs are calling the plays as new quarterbacks on the field, how many of you today have directly briefed your board on cybersecurity risk or corporate resilience in the past even maybe 6 or 12 months? Tackling risk head-on drives new innovations, leading to sustainable market growth. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers 2024 Global Crisis Survey, Companies with proactive, mature cyber risk strategies grow 2.5 times faster post-crisis. So what that means is embedding and practicing resiliency across departments and teams increases productivity, internal morale, customer confidence, and loyalty in your organization. So another question you can ponder is, how many of you are still caught in the leadership conversations that concentrate on security spend? Versus, how many of you are to the point where you're actively and directly discussing strategic risk and resiliency as growth insurance, loyalty enablement, or even drivers of positive internal culture? That's a lot. And we're not all there, right? We're not all pro players from the get-go, and that's totally okay. So let's take a look and see how some of the pros are reaching those levels. JP Morgan invested billions in cybersecurity. They're setting industry benchmarks, and they have a global cybersecurity center of excellence. They've built their competitive edge in customer trust of digital banking through cybersecurity. Walmart blocked 8.5 billion fake customer bots to allow faster customer service and delivery to real customers. They concentrated on a secure digital foundation to allow faster global expansion as well. There's a lot of research studies out there. Forrester found 92% increase in ROI over 3 years with folks using zero trust solutions. They found cloud app security saw an ROI of 151% over 3 years. And they also found that organizations using Defender had a 242% increase in ROI over 3 years. ESI Thought Lab benchmark study also found a 170% ROI increase with investments directly in cybersecurity. So the best CIOs don't just reduce risk and increase resiliency, they turn it into a market advantage and they discuss it internally at the highest executive tables. So how are global companies dealing with risk and resiliency challenges? Naturally, at the global level, broader attack surfaces over hybrid and multi-cloud consortiums require strong monitoring and redundancy. That attack surface exponentially increases AI-driven threats, and that requires strong and standardized global governance, risk assessments, and data accessibility practices. The complicated orchestration of the consortium and partners at a global level within one ecosystem means all players need to be prepared, aligned, and ready on the cybersecurity front. Diverse languages and different time zones can mean loss of vital minutes in the face of incidents or disasters. And this requires thoughtful communications, robust training, and second nature reactions when issues occur. So global organizations have a wider reach, but the challenges are no different than in smaller organizations. And you're most likely dealing with many of these challenges in your own company. So, knowing the possible is in fact possible, let's talk about some foundational components to your CIO playbook for risk and resiliency. Okay, how are we going to tackle all of this? Listen, you don't need 50 plays. You really only need 5. And you need to practice and execute those flawlessly. Number 1, tie your IT goals directly to the enterprise risk profile. Don't know what your risk profile is at the enterprise level? Or maybe your executives can't express that to you, or they push it back on IT or security? Put some examples on paper with pros and cons and put that on the table. Nitpicking from the group is really going to start the conversation. Number two, try to speak in financial stability, growth, and ROI language, not just firewalls, disaster scenarios, and financial loss. For example, you might choose to explain the strong evidence of security controls and those implementations directly contributing to six-figure, sometimes, security insurance premium savings. Number three, obviously, plan and practice for disruption, not just prevention. Get executives involved in tabletops so all the corporate heads are clear under pressure. Number four, embed risk management and resiliency practices into your operational processes and transformation roadmaps as well. Start with simple things like secure coding and software development lifecycle practices, and approach reviews with a shift left mindset. If you think you're embedding cybersecurity into processes already, get some new eyes on those processes from different roles and have them review and see if they can see more. Naturally, familiarize yourself with NIST and ISO standards and frameworks. And I love shift left practices. Shift left is a fantastic group exercise where you can look at a process and see what activities could be taken on by the process step or the process players in the step before. This directly contributes to effort and capacity improvements, timely delivery and support, and an overall better understanding of each other's responsibilities. Number five, you might collaborate well with your executive colleagues, but are you really a united partnership? Try to take time to sharpen again your elevator pitch, even for your colleagues, so they understand the value of risk management and resiliency in everyone's capabilities. Now, a collaboration is working together in a more come and go as needed way, but a united partnership is structured, it's equally embedded, it's longer term, and with true shared ownership. Great CIOs are translators. They create an understanding for cyber risk and resiliency that everyone can get their head around. So, ask yourself which of these points your organization positively reflects and which might need a little bit of work. On the left, where to concentrate. Prioritize the basics. That might be documentation or ensuring that you have an up-to-date asset management inventory or working on those disaster recovery plans, even the players, and knowing who those are. Building awareness across the organization might mean talking with finance about risk and resiliency, or legal, the operations department, naturally, or even supply chain. And something to think about is, are you leading organizational culture change? Is there a resiliency mindset in your organization and not just a checkbox security effort? Some pitfalls to avoid are on the right, but I would concentrate maybe on that third bullet point, under investing in resilience. Investing in resilience is going to allow you to withstand, recover from, and adapt to cyber events. So it's easier to ensure operational continuity. So now that we've done our homework, we've trained, and we're ready for game day, using your playbook. Here's 4 takeaways for your back pocket after our session ends today. Ensure the CIO and the CISO understand each other's priorities in their own words, not just in a strategy. Create a shared understanding of C-suite risks and map them directly to business goals. Define what the organization means by resiliency, and pilot a cyber tabletop or a live fire or a simulation. So allow me to close with this. If you had to explain to your board tomorrow how security is fueling growth through risk and resiliency, do you have your one sentence elevator pitch prepared? I do hope you could take some of these points from this session as ideas for your own CIO playbook. And I'd love for you to reach out and connect on LinkedIn. Thank you.
All right. Okay, doctor, that was very enlightening, very cool. And there are some audience questions if you're ready. Here's one. With increasing global uncertainty and supply chain vulnerabilities, what practical steps can organizations take to secure their digital operations?
That's a good question. I think that we have to start with the basics, and I'm very welcome for anybody that's in supply chain specifically to jump in or anyone with ideas. I do sessions quite a bit, and I very much depend on and enjoy the collaborative discussions that we can have together. So I'm not the expert. I always feel like we're experts in the room, and I like to support people as such. So I think that we do have to stick with the basics. I think that even for supply chain or other industries, it's all about getting back to the foundational elements of not just writing a strategy. I've been a strategy leader as well. It can take a lot of time and effort to write a cybersecurity or IT strategy. Nevertheless, there's often times when it's not really read or lived by or embedded in the daily work that folks do every day. So if someone out there in our participation is from supply chain or manufacturing, please jump on. But like I said, I'm always going back to the basics. Are you talking to your colleagues? Are you really on a united front with your CISO? And are you talking to the leadership that really needs to be involved in disaster recovery? Would anyone else like to chime in with real world examples?
Okay, well, while we're waiting, I'll move on to another question. Um, what role does automation or AI play in strengthening resilience and mitigating cyber threats across distributed environments?
I think that AI is been around for a long time. It's become incredibly popular. Everyone's got it in their back pocket. And I think there's good ways that we can use AI in security. And I also think that there's a lot of reasons to up our game in terms of cybersecurity practices. So I'm the kind of person, and I've said this in panel sessions before. Although I'm interested in AI and all it can bring, and I'm very collaborative with big global service provider players that have a lot of cybersecurity embedded in their processes and in their solutions. But I'm also cautious of what we can do in a fast way. And I always go back to the data. I've been in global corporations that had the funding to be able to jump on board with AI very quickly. And I can say after doing our due diligence, which I'm very proud of, that we paused and hesitated and we decided to go back and look at our data hygiene and our PII practices and make sure that we really had a solid foundation. I know I'm going to be a broken record here, a solid foundation in data management and data hygiene before we jumped on the AI bandwagon.
Great. And how can CIOs make a strong case for continued investment in resilience initiatives, especially during periods of economic pressure?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I think sometimes in economic pressure, we have a tendency to shift investments into more market-based or customer-based initiatives. Nevertheless, as we just touched on a bit today in this short session, in the mid to long term, even the short term, if there's issues and problems, you're going to need that investment in cybersecurity. So making sure the CIO and the CISO are absolute in tandem with each other, even if they're not necessarily in the same line organization, and making sure that there's a voice at the table, even at the marketing or CEO, COO levels, is going to be imperative. You don't want to hide the voices of the CIO and the CISO. If there's market issues, you want to make sure that they're still at the table. Also in M&A and divests, a lot of you might notice that IT comes often at the end of the process when signatures are already signed or ready to be signed, but the value that they can bring in the beginning of the process is incredible. And sometimes, unless other C-level partners are seeing that happen and seeing what value IT can bring, including security, they don't always know what kind of value they can bring to the beginning of the process. Make sure that you're at the table. Make sure you keep knocking on the doors and you get in there with marketing, with finance, with CEOs and others that are making sometimes even global business decisions.
Great. Here's another question. What are the most common mistakes organizations make when developing resilience strategies, and how can they avoid them?
I think the most common mistake that I see over and over, and I have to admit, it doesn't depend on the size of the corporation, doesn't depend on if it's public or private sector, is concentrating on what we do reactively and not proactively. So what are we going to do if we have a disaster? Who are we going to call when this happens and that happens? That's great. Having those plans, knowing those contact partners, and having a protocol in place is absolutely key. But I do think that we need to balance doing all that with a lot of proactive efforts and just making sure we touched on just a bit today. And I'd love to talk more about this. Having a trust culture within your organization and having that resiliency cultural mindset within the organization. That is something completely different than just being reactive to disasters and issues.
Great. And we have a little bit more time, and we're waiting on other questions. But do you have anything you'd like to add?
I would like to say that the four points that I had at the last slide is really key for me. Um, I think a lot of organizations don't even know how to answer the question, what is their definition of resiliency or what does it mean to them? And even starting there is, I believe, going to be eye-opening for a lot of folks. Even if you're in a very, very large organization, just because one particular group or one particular region has a solid understanding of resiliency and has a very, very mature risk management practice, because it's a global organization and a consortium, that could mean that it's quite inconsistent over the rest of the organization. So those conversations can happen at any level. You don't have to wait for the CISO or the CIO at a regional or global level to start those discussions. No matter what roles you're in and no matter what region you're in, or public and private sector, just go and ask someone, hey, what do you think about resiliency? Do you think that your department or your team is resilient if something happened? Here's what I think. So that starts to bubble up. Those discussions, it starts to grow, and suddenly there's a conversation across the corporation or the organization that might start uncovering some real valuable tips and suggestions and improvements that you didn't know were there.
Great. And here's another question. I actually have a question. How do you see AI progressing over, say, the next 3 to 5 years, uh, as far as processes go? In other words, do you think that it will be a collaboration between humans and AI, or do you think AI will take over more and more of the processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe AI will take over more and more, but I'll tell you something, and it might not be the sexiest, most popular viewpoint on AI. I believe organizations, also organizations with a lot of money behind AI, will push for it. They'll start making real progress for the rest of us that are in smaller organizations and corporations. And I think that's going to be fascinating and super valuable for all of us to watch. Nevertheless, I think a lot of organizations and corporations will fall short of their of their expectations for AI. And I think that's also okay. There's going to be investments that are going to go a little bit down the drain, but I believe that if you're not ready and you try it and it doesn't work, that is an incredible lessons learned to know exactly where in your organization you should be concentrating. I've heard folks say, I'm doing AI. And when you talk to them, they're actually really, really interested in moving workflow automation forward. And that's what they consider AI right now, because that's the maturity level of their understanding or their organization. That's not necessarily bad. So even the failures that might come, even the fact that some of us with less funding available to dedicate to AI, even if we have to wait, that is a very valuable time when we can start doing our due diligence on cleaning up our room, getting the data hygiene there, understanding where our asset inventory maturity is, and our PII, and really preparing for a different phase in the future where we can tackle AI in a much, much more successful way. So I'm super appreciative to organizations that are trying and failing, because that's going to make us all stronger in the end. So it will continue, but we're not all caught up right now. Not yet.
Great. Yeah, we have another question here. Um, can partnership models sustain financial stability? Can shared risks drive resilience? Can this be included in recovery plans? What's your best advice?
Yeah, I mean, I want to believe that that's true, right? I want to believe that can happen. And I feel like resiliency and risk management does take investment. Sometimes you're going to have to work with investments that are and funding sources that are quite small, and you don't have a choice. And other organizations you're working with millions and sometimes billions of dollars, right? But if we're talking about true partnerships, then we can also start discussions about how much each one of us can invest in. It shouldn't, in my opinion, just be the budget of information and data security, or the budget of the CISO that's investing into resiliency for the organization. It shouldn't be that everyone is just looking toward the CIO or the CISO to make this happen. Resiliency is something that um, that goes beyond just what some organizations feel like is the cybersecurity function. And I think COOs, CFOs, legal department, operations, there's a lot of different departments that should be thinking seriously about investing into the organization's resiliency efforts.
Great. Well, I want to thank you again, Ricky, for such an incredible keynote. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. This officially concludes the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum, Data Driven Leadership. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. We look forward to seeing you at our next Argyle Digital Information Technology event soon, which will be our AI Decision Maker Summit, Revolutionizing Business Strategy with AI, on November 12th, 2025. Have a great rest of your day.